Chapter 24, Goodbyes. Kevin had to do a quick cleanup as Al carried Jen into his apartment. He tossed everything off his old thrift store couch, and Al laid the brunette down on it. Gwen was shaking, and Kevin took hold of her hand. "Has anything like this ever happened before?" he asked as he guided Gwen into a chair. His furniture was mixed, what he could find or scrounge enough earth cash to buy cheap. Gwen shook her head as she took a deep breath. "No, this hasn't happened before. Not like this. Sometimes when Jen overuses the Omnitrix, she'll sleep for most of the next day, but she's never passed out like this before." Al stood. "She is all right. Exhaustion, nothing more. She just needs rest. Food, when she wakes, would not be a bad idea." Kevin nodded. "I don't have anything at the moment. Been a bit busy with the DNAliens and everything else that's been happening to go grocery shopping." Gwen pulled out her phone. "He's all right with everyone?" They all nodded, and Gwen called in the order while Kevin searched through his things to find a spare blanket. He ended up pulling the blanket off his bed. He apparently didn't have a spare. He honestly hadn't expected to bring people over to this apartment, but here he was, tossing a comforter over the girl who had once been his worst enemy, then going to comfort her cousin. The pizza was delivered quickly, and the three conscious beings sat around nibbling. They all jumped as Al's phone began to ring. "My apologies." He answered the call. "Varaxi." "Yes, I am quite well." "They have actually pulled back. That is wonderful news." "Yes, we are all well. We can contact my parents in a while. I am waiting for Jen to awaken. I will explain some other time." He hung up and glanced over at the couch. "The incursions left?" Jen's voice was a little rough with sleep. Gwen leapt into her cousin's arms. Jen hugged the redhead as Kevin laughed lightly. Al smiled, the stars in his skin twinkling. "Yes, they have. The three of you have saved my world in one night. Thank you." Jen grinned sleepily as she sat up. She yawned as Gwen fussed. Kevin held out a soda, and Jen downed it quickly. He handed her another and grabbed the pizza box, setting it in front of the cousins. Jen dug in immediately as Gwen began telling her everything that had happened after she transformed. Jen stayed quiet as her mouth was full. Al and Kevin added in pieces of information here and there, but Gwen told her the majority of the story. "I'm glad it all worked out," she said, stretching and smiling. "We should probably get you back to Varaxi, figure out what's going on Apollo 1. Albrasix smiled. "The incursions have retreated entirely. Varaxi received a communication from my parents, asking what happened. I would like to have the three of you there when I explain what happened, if you do not mind." They all nodded. "Tomorrow?" Al nodded and kissed the back of Jen's hand. "That sounds lovely. Varaxi is on her way to pick me up for the night. I must thank you again. You have saved my whole world." Jen smiled, her face going a bit red. "I didn't do that much this time around." There was a sharp rap on the door, and Al stepped over to it, Jen following him. They said goodbye at the door. It was slightly awkward, as neither of them seemed to know what to do. In the end, Al simply kissed the back of Jen's hand again, and left, getting into the back of Varaxi's car. Jen watched the car turn the corner, then she flopped back onto the couch. "Never again." Her voice was muffled as she spoke into the comforter. "Why not? When it was working, you kicked some serious ass." Jen glared at Kevin from her spot on his couch. "It's not worth the price. Trust me." Gwen nodded, lightly kicking Kevin when he went to argue again. Jen knew what her lines were, and she would not cross them. It was what made her a good hero. She stuck to her guns and her rules. They didn't make sense to everyone, but they were solid. Their talk with the royalty of Apollo 1 went well. Kevin kept his mouth shut and let Gwen and Jen do the talking. Gwen was a fantastic diplomat. She could have a future in it if she wanted. They were beyond grateful to the three of them for all they had done for Albrasix and for the planet as a whole. They promised them rewards beyond imagining, and Jen and Gwen turned them all down, Jen stepping on Kevin's foot before he could speak. Once they'd been dismissed, so Al could have a moment to speak with his parents alone, Jen spoke before Kevin could argue. "We don't do it for the reward, Kevin. We do it to save lives. Let that be its own reward." He rolled his eyes as Gwen nodded. Al stepped over to them after a few more minutes. "I would like to thank you on behalf of my people again." He went quiet for a moment. "A transport will be here tomorrow to return me to Apollo 1. Kevin blinked. It hadn't occurred to him that the only reason Al was here was because of the war on his planet. Without the threat of the incursions, Al would have to go home, back to his responsibilities as a prince. Gwen took Kevin's hands. "Hey, Kevin, I need you to help me with something over by the car." He nodded, taking her hint that they should give the couple a moment. Al was silent for a moment. "I will be unable to convince you to come away with me." It wasn't really a question. Jen still shook her head, though. You have responsibilities back home. I have responsibilities here. I think we both knew this was going to happen eventually. Al nodded at her words. "True. It does not mean I am exactly happy with this outcome. My people are safe. I owe you a debt I can never repay. But I am losing you." Jen glanced down at her shoes. Al took her hand. "I will not ask you to wait for me. It would be unfair to both of us." Jen looked up at him, a bit surprised. "I care for you deeply. Will you be here to say goodbye tomorrow? I would ask you to be." Jen nodded. "I'll be here." Her voice caught in her throat. She wanted to say more. She liked Al, she really did, but she couldn't leave. She had too much going on here. She couldn't abandon Earth, not after everything she'd done to keep this world safe. Al nodded and kissed her on the back of her hand. She hesitated, but nodded and turned back to Kevin's car. She was silent the whole way home. The next night came too quickly for her tastes. They met outside of town. Varaxi handed off her ID mask to Kevin, claiming she wouldn't need it back home. It didn't take too long for the ship to land. They were met at the ship by several other Apollonites, all dressed in bright pink. Their clothes were similar to the chitons of ancient Greece. Jen held that bit of irony to herself. They all bowed. Albraxix smiled and gestured 3 of them, guards, forward. Each carried something. Al motioned the first one forward. "Kevin Levin, you have been a true friend to me and assisted me with my time on Earth. As thanks, I present you with this." The guard pressed a button, which appeared to be the only thing he was holding. A small cart came down the ramp on the ship, with several metal crates on it, the finest car parts that could be found on Apollo 1, all fitted to accept Earth's sun rays as a power source. Kevin grinned as he was handed the remote to the cart. "Thanks, Your Highness." There was only a slight bit of sarcasm in his voice, and it went unnoticed anyway. Al nodded, and turned to the next guard, who was holding a rather large book. "Gwendolyn Tennyson, you are wise beyond your years. I have only known you for a short time, but I believe you will be excellent at whatever you choose to be. This book is from the Royal Library of Apollo 1. Contains many an old spell that may be of use to you. Learn well." "Thank you, Your Highness." Gwen grinned, excited, as she was handed the large tome. Then Al turned to Jen and took her hand. "Jen Tennyson, hero of hundreds of worlds. Hero of my world. You have my thanks for all eternity. There is nothing I could do to express my gratitude for all you have done for me since learning of my presence here on this world. I hope these small gifts will in some way show my gratitude." He gestured to the final guard forward. He held forth a small circular device. It was green and black. Jen took it and tapped it. It grew in seconds into a full hoverboard. Jen smiled. Al turned to the guard and took the box he was still holding and opened it. It was a necklace. The chain was silver and delicate. The pendant was carefully carved into the symbol of the Omnitrix, surrounded in silver and obsidian. It looked like a jewel-encrusted plumber's badge, but much smaller. "This is not merely something to accentuate your beauty. It is a short-range communicator. You should be able to pick up faster-than-light transmissions and make calls with it as well. I believed you would appreciate something of substance rather than something simply decorative." Jen smiled and reached out a hand to him. He took it and kissed the back of it. "I'm gonna miss you, Al." Al's smile was sad. "I will miss you as well. May I?" He leaned in slightly and Jen nodded. The kiss was soft and short, just a press of lips. They pulled apart as Varaxi shook hands with the other 2 and bowed. They were saluted as Varaxi and Al stepped aboard the ship. The guards loaded into the ship, and the 3 humans watched as it took off. Kevin turned to the boxes as the ship ascended into the upper atmosphere. Gwen turned away to check out what Kevin had received, her new book tucked under her arm. Jen kept watching until she couldn't pick out the difference between the ship and the stars. Gwen set her book down in the front seat of Kevin's car. She stepped over to Jen and put a hand on her shoulder. "We should get going." Jen nodded. Scrubbing her eyes and deactivating the hoverboard in her hands, she slipped the necklace on and scrubbed her eyes again. "You're right. We have work to do." Chapter 25. Stripped. Jen would admit that she hadn't expected to see another plumber for a long while yet. For some reason, they didn't come to Earth often anymore. She really didn't expect to be treated like a child by him, dismissed out of hand. Then he had to go and take Kevin's badge. "You're kidding me. You're seriously going to strip Earth of the only protection it's got." She stepped forward, anger burning in her eyes, even as Gwen tried to hold her back. "Do you have any idea what's happening down here? Did you even know Magister Labrid was dead, or did you just not care?" The Magister stepped backward, looking taken aback. "Did you have any idea that the DNAliens are turning people into more of them? Using something called a xenocyte that overwrites the host DNA entirely, crumbles it apart until there's only enough left to hold the invasive DNA together?" She took another step forward. "Do you know how I know that? I know that because I used the Omnitrix to cure my cousin, the one who had no idea about aliens, I might add, who they took hostage to find my Grandpa Max. The same Max Tennyson who blew himself up, along with a hybrid and a nest of DNAliens and xenocytes to stop a plan to infect dozens, maybe hundreds of cities. And where were you when that happened? When the DNAliens build weather machines and kids of plumbers get blamed? When the hybrid nearly vaporized a city and I had to take down their ship?" She was up in his face, at this point, one finger inches from his nose, even though she was quite a bit shorter than him. "Did you know about any of that? And I would like to point out that at no point did any of us say we were plumbers. Not even me, and I actually have a spot in the plumber ranks unless I've been very misinformed. Kevin Levin has every right to carry that badge, as every child of a plumber has that right." Kevin blinked. He had implied that his father was a plumber, but he hadn't exactly told them outright. The Magister frowned. "Kevin Levin is a criminal, on parole from..." Jen cut him off. "Kevin Levin has done more to help than any plumber I've ever worked with, except for Magister Labrid, who died to stop what he warned could be a full-scale invasion. My grandfather died to fight the hybrid, and you do nothing." The Magister bristled. "I have it on good information that you three have been pretending to be plumbers. You do have a plumber rank, that much is true, and when you're old enough, a team waiting for you. But he's a criminal on probation. He can't be allowed to carry a badge that's final." He glared at Jen. "You're an uppity little human. The Galvin have ordered that you be given free rein only up to a point. Don't push me too far, Tennyson. I will not hesitate to throw you into the null void along with your little team." With that, he vanished, taking a short-range teleporter back to whatever ship he'd arrived from. Jen let out an angry breath, and Kevin stared. "Jen, you may have just signed all of our arrest warrants," Gwen said, shaking her head. "He deserved it. There are better ways to do the things than accusing an actual Magister of the Plumbers of not doing his job." Kevin shrugged. "I never thought I would say this, but I agree with Jen. Guy was a dick. How did you know about my dad?" That silenced Gwen, who looked like she still wanted to argue about her cousin flouting authority. "First night I found out about the hole, I did some research. Why do you think you're on parole now instead of being tossed back into the null void on sight by a plumber?" Kevin stared. "That was you? I sort of assumed it was for good behavior." Jen let out a humorless laugh. "Dealing to Forever Nights for DNAliens is good behavior? Yeah, that was me. I needed my team to be able to operate together. So much for that. Bureaucratic bastards." She kept grumbling as she made her way back to the car. Gwen took Kevin's hand. Your dad was a plumber? Yeah, he nodded. He was. It's part of why I wanted to help you guys. I wanted to make him proud. I don't even really remember him, but I want him to be proud of who I am. Gwen squeezed his hand. I'm sure he would be proud of you, Kevin. You've done a lot of good. Kevin smiled slightly, but then he frowned. I need my badge back. If I know Jen, she's going to do everything in her power to get it back. She doesn't like being told no. Kevin nodded. That much I already knew. Gwen laughed. Can you imagine her in charge of her own team of plumbers? Gwen shrugged at Kevin. Well, I could see it happening. I don't know how well it would go, though. I would want a hand in picking her team. They can't bow to her every request. They need to have a spine, even around the wielder of the Omnitrix. She said the title like she used to say doofus. Kevin laughed. Kevin had been inches from finally kissing Gwen when the Highbreed attacked. He was very, very annoyed. The Magister showing up again was icing on the cake, but the cherry on top was the man in the metal mask attacking them, draining them. Everything went gray as the metal he'd absorbed sloughed off. He heard Jen grunt in pain as she, as Humongosaur, tried to approach their attacker, despite growing to twice the size as normal. The black energy seemed to be draining her faster than she could compensate. She screamed, and green flashed within black. Jen collapsed to her knees, and the man in the metal mask spoke. Oh, I forgot how delicious these Tennyson girls are. Jen's eyes went wide. Gwen, run. Gwen protested at her cousin's demand. Go! You're our last hope. Go now! Gwen grunted as the black light around her flashed brighter, and she collapsed. Kevin's vision went dim as he passed out, hearing weak protests from the Magister as the man in the metal mask approached the still form in green. Gwen must have taken her cousin's advice and run, for she didn't seem to be anywhere around. Kevin knew she wouldn't let anyone touch her cousin if she was around. The Magister's mind raced. He had awoken in chains, dangling in a stasis field. He wasn't alone, either. The Highbreed was on one side, chained as well. Kevin Levin was here too, and Jen Tennyson. Both humans were still unconscious, though that didn't last long. Kevin woke up first. There wasn't much he could do, though. Jen, wake up! Come on, Jenny, your cousin will kill me if you die, and we were finally taking steps towards actually getting somewhere. Oh, really? When did that happen? And who asked who? 'Cause if Gwen asked you, Julie owes me money. The reply was weak as green eyes blinked open. Kevin laughed with relief. Oh, good. That would not have been a good way for you to go. Jen laughed, though there wasn't much humor in it. Nah, I gotta die a hero when you live like one. The Magister stared at them. He'd heard plumbers with years more experience than himself speak like this. Never people this young. Still children in the eyes of every society, of every world he knew. But gallows humor wasn't something he'd ever wanted to hear from children. It's good to see you still have a sense of humor, Jen. The man in the metal mask stepped forward from the shadows, ignoring the Highbreed and Magister completely. The Magister frowned. You were the one who informed me they were impersonating officers. Why are you doing this? Because he was lying, Magister. We never pretended to be anything other than what we are. You, though, here she spoke to their captor, you were a fake since the moment we met you. Weren't you, Michael? She said it as if she'd known all along who it had been. The man in the mask laughed. Kevin tensed. Michael Morningstar? The ass who tried to steal tried to kill all those girls from his school? Jen nodded, rolling her eyes at Kevin's backtracking. That's the one. It had to be. He's the only plumber's kid who isn't on our side. He's not really on anyone's side, except his own. Michael laughed loudly as he pulled off his mask. It clattered to the floor. Jen let out an exclamation of disgust, and the Magister couldn't help but agree. The skin under the mask was mottled gray. He had tufts of hair that was probably blonde at one point. His skin was stretched tight over his skull, dipping drastically at his eye sockets. Jen kept talking. It had to be a plumber's kid. Only they would have had the tech to even contact the Magisters, but getting through has been exceedingly difficult. I know I've been trying to get some help for us down here for a while. but there was always something in my way. I'm betting I know why now.
Oh, aren't you the clever one, Jen? It's why you told sweet Gwen to run. You knew who I was, or figured it out fast enough. But soon that won't matter.
Mike held up a hand and black light shot from it, surrounding Jen in seconds. She screamed loudly as the light sparkled and shimmered around her.
Leave her alone!
The Magister beat Kevin to it by a second. But Gwen beat them all when she showed up with the DNAliens, pissed off about the kidnapping of their boss. Michael was dispatched quickly, and Jen waved off attempts to assist her even as she wobbled on her feet. Gwen grabbed hold of her cousin as she stumbled. Where's the Highbreed? Gwen shook her head. Got away. DNAliens took it. The Magister shook his head.
Is this the kind of thing that happens often?
Oh, just every week or so. The Magister nodded slightly as he locked down Michael.
Maybe I don't need to send the good men to Earth. There's already a good team here.
Jen glanced around at her team. What are you saying, Magister? The Magister grinned as he pulled Kevin's badge from his armor.
It means you've been drafted.
He handed the badge back to Kevin, who smiled. He pulled a second from his armor and handed it to Gwen. He nodded to Jen, who waved him off. In a way, she already had her own badge in the watch. He nodded.
As of this moment, you three are the only acting law in this sector. I won't be able to do much. I have several sectors to manage, but I will try and help when I can. To be honest, I have 6 more inhabited worlds to watch over. I'm trusting Earth to you three.
So, keep doing what we've been doing? Jen asked, only slightly sarcastically. The Magister rolled his eyes.
You know, I met your grandfather. You're exactly like him.
Jen grinned. Thanks.
I haven't decided if it's a compliment yet.
Jen's grin didn't falter. I'm going to take it as one. The Magister shook his head as he teleported himself and Michael, now in energy manacles and a dome just for safety, back to his ship.